Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Barcoding Huddle. I'm your host, Jody Costa, the VP of Marketing for Barcoding Incorporated. Barcoding is a supply chain automation and innovation company helping organizations like yours become more efficient, accurate, and connected. And today, we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite topics, and that is RAIN RFID, specifically how this type of IoT technology is enabling us to better track returnable transport items in our businesses, which has huge ramifications for our sustainability goals, our productivity goals, and just overall health of the business. So we've invited some very special partners onto this huddle with us today, and I'm excited to welcome them on board. So panelists, if you would like to please join me. Thank you. So this huddle today is brought to us by Impinj. Impinj enables digital transformation by extending the internet's reach from the cloud through edge connectivity devices all the way to physical items. Their connectivity platform provides a foundation for partners to develop IoT solutions that help customers like you vitalize, virtualize, analyze, and optimize all the I's their business. So Impinj, thank you and welcome. And the huddle today is also brought to you by Real-Time Intelligence. RTI builds solutions that improve supply chain operations. As a team with diverse backgrounds in data science, API development, RFID, packaging, and more, RTI built their EP360 suite to track and produce analytics for virtually any physical process. Wonderful, wonderful companies, wonderful partners for barcoding. Thrilled to have you here with us today. So without further ado, I always like to start with some introductions. You know who I am, but let's get to the rest of the panelists. I'm actually going to start with my fellow Barcoding Inc. employee. So JW, I'm going to kick it to you first.
Thanks, Jody, and appreciate the time. JW Franz, I am a barcoding supply chain geek who really enjoys most of his days talking about IoT technology like RAIN RFID. And but in all seriousness, I've been with the company almost 2 years, and I've enjoyed driving our technology solutions through our partners like RT Intel and Impinj to make our customers more successful. So thank you.
You are most welcome. David, how about we go to you at Real-Time Intelligence?
Hey, thank you, Jody. It's an absolute pleasure to be with this really great audience of people to talk about a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. I am the founder and CEO of Real-Time Intelligence. And as you mentioned for us already in the introduction, we bring to the market a supply chain visibility platform designed to shed light on many of the supply chain issues that are centered around lack of visibility of things in motion. So, and we obviously leverage the Impinj technologies to help us do that. And last but not least, if you happen to be connected with me on LinkedIn, you would know that I'm also JW's cycling partner.
That's right. We're basically all family at this point. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And Sandy, how about you?
For having me, Jody. Nice to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Murty. I lead the global partner development team at Impinj. What that basically means is I get to work with our partner ecosystem worldwide. As many of you probably know, we do all of our business with and through partners like Barcoding and Real-Time Intel. So I'm really excited to be on this call with them today. My journey at Impinj is now in its 8th year. I've been almost all those years in a customer or partner-facing role. So I've had the privilege of experiencing many use cases and solution deployments and wins that our customers partners have realized with RAIN RFID, and looking forward to sharing more of that today.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I'm thrilled to have this group on the huddle with me, just personally and professionally. I know this is going to be a great conversation. So without further ado, let's get into it. I've been educated really in this realm thanks to all of you. But for our audience, I really want to start kind of a little bit at the beginning. So RAIN RFID, RFID in general, obviously we've heard about this for many decades. And I think most folks are familiar with the technology. But one of the use cases that's been very well vetted and has become a very popular implementation for RAIN RFID is around returnable transport items. So let's just start there. When we say returnable transport items, returnable plastic containers, what kinds of things are we talking about, and why are businesses adopting these types of items in their businesses? And David, I'm going to start with you.
Well, that's a great starting point, because it would sound at first that you framed it into just little things of plastic and totes and things like that, but it runs the gamut from a $5 tray or tote in, let's say, the produce industry or the food and beverage, all the way up to a $1,500 steel rack in the manufacturing space, and everywhere in between. And it's the lifeblood of a supply chain. It's the thing that people don't take into account until they don't have it. And it's a panic situation. It shuts the supply chain down. And I'll give you anecdotally what we see happen before we started applying a sensor-based technology and RFID in general to manage that. In a tier one automotive supplier situation, they have custom racks that are $1,500 a piece. And at that price point, they're not buying tens of thousands or hundreds or even millions of them like you might see of a $5 tray. They're buying 100 of them, and they have to efficiently use those. And that 100 was that value was derived with a number of assumptions in place at the beginning. And one of the assumptions might be when I send my parts on these custom racks to, let's say, Ford as the OEM, there's an expectation that it comes back in 2.5 days on average. Well, nobody maintains that. Nobody keeps track of the rack. All that matters is the part that has to get onto the car. Well, what happens is it slowly drifts from 2.5 days to 2.8 days to 3.5 days, and all of a sudden, there's no racks to ship the parts. And when you can't ship, it's not like you can switch it to an expendable packaging and ship it in a box over to Ford. It doesn't work like that. So what happens is they shut Ford's production line down. Ooh. And this tier one supplier, they send all their people home, and they scramble to try to find these racks and bring them back home, and then call everybody in and pay double time and expedited shipping, and it's a very significant issue. With RAIN RFID in place, we're keeping track of those things that are moving, and we're keeping track of that average. And within inside of our platform, you can set a threshold that says, hey, over the last 30 days or last 60 days, when the average drifts to 2.7, I want an alert sent. I want a text message. I want an email. I want some event to take place so that I know I've got an impending problem that I can get out in front of and fix it before it results in all those catastrophic events. So returnables, inexpensive, expensive, and everywhere in between. Yeah, they run the gamut, and it's really critical to know where they're at.
So what I think was interesting about that story, so people may not associate returnable transport items with something like that rack that you were mentioning, right? I think a lot of us probably think about pallets, pallets and crates, right? Yeah. So, Sandy, I think from so we walked through kind of an example of returnable transport items in the automotive space and kind of at that that criticality, that lifeblood. But what if I'm watching this? I'm like, well, for me, a returnable container, I might just use a one-off, right? I mean, what's the big deal of what's the benefit of maybe even thinking about something that's a bit more reusable?
Yeah, Dave, I love that story, by the way. I wrote down some bullet points as you were talking about that. So thank you. But Jody, to your question, I think, Dave did a great job illustrating the business value in that particular example. And there are conversely at the other end of the spectrum, when we are talking about the $5 RTIs or the $10 RTIs, whether it's a tote or a crate or anything like that, even that has maybe different levels of business value, but different type of business value for those organizations. And more recently, one of the themes we've been seeing with customers is around this notion not only of business process efficiency and optimization, like the example Dave just mentioned, but then this focus on sustainability that is driving an even higher level of importance on the reusability of RTIs. By definition, they're reusable, but the focus on sustainability is, I think, increasing the level of visibility organizations want to have on those reusable items. You can imagine if you lose those reusable transport items, you're essentially not only losing whether it's a $1,500 rack or a $5 tote, you're going to have to replace that. That has sustainability implications. And if you're transforming your business to be more sustainable, you can actually transform your business to start using RTIs in places where you may not have been previously, and actually reduce your emissions footprint as a result of doing that. But that naturally then means you need to be able to track these things. You can't think of them as disposable assets anymore. And that brings us back to the traceability and trackability with RAIN that Dave already talked about. So we're seeing that angle also become more important. And as an example of on our website with Impinj, example of a wholesale food distributor in the UK that uses reusable totes to distribute produce to their customers. One of their drivers was sustainability. Even before it became a buzzword, they've been doing this now for a few years as one reason driven by sustainability.
Oh, I love that. JW?
Yeah, and I was gonna add one other thing to all the great comments that Dave and Sandy made, and that's you have to remember that when you move away from corrugated packaging to sustainable reusable packaging, whether it's a pallet or a tote or something, there's also processes within a manufacturer, for example, that's dependent on that form factor of that transport item. So in the case of corrugate, if it's transporting, like what Sandy said, food, if that food is leaking in that corrugated container, that packaging breaks down, the mechanism to transport that through operations is now impacted. So when you move to reusable packaging, it's got consistency in its form factor and minimizes breakage and damage and other things that can have process impacts in terms of transporting it through the supply chain.
Oh, I love that. And I just know, I mean, that's the right combination, right? When sustainability initiatives and productivity go hand in hand. And I think this is like that wonderful use case for that. And I know it's a driver. I talk to customers, and this is a key initiative going into next year. It's kind of no longer a nice to have, it's kind of a must have, right? So I think the returnable transport items is a great way to get involved. I think there's probably, though, folks out there who are saying to themselves, like, well, we have thought about it, we've looked at this, and maybe it's not the people who already know that these returnable racks are part of their supply chain, but they say, maybe I don't, there's just been challenges, right? I've either racked up a ton of losses because I can't track them, or I don't know how to do the maintenance on them, or I don't have the labor to keep track of this. So let's just talk about some of the unique challenges around managing returnable transport items pre-RAIN RFID. So this is like, if we haven't adopted, what are we seeing? So JW, I'll start with you, and then we'll go around the horn, because I think there's probably quite a lot. And this is the reason we get into this, right? For those on the phone, is so we can build that ROI, right? And it should be pretty clear after we start to talk about this.
Yeah, and I think my comment here is going to be somewhat generic or general, I should say, whatever choice of words. But ultimately, we know RAIN RFID augments processes. We move away from pen and paper. We move away from barcode scanning. We get away from all the tedious manual processes in general. In Dave's example, when you talk about automotive racks, yeah, maybe it's manageable to do pen and paper or barcode when you have a few hundred returnables for automotive, but I'm not saying it is either. But then if you move into, say, more the food space, where you're using hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of returnables to transport goods through your supply chain, certainly that now becomes incredibly different task. So RFID right there alone simply helps automate those processes that would be historical touch points, and I think that right there is one of the biggest savings. I'm sorry. In addition to other areas as well. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, Dave, I'll turn to you for extra comment on kind of what you're seeing out there today. Where are people struggling? Maybe some more examples.
Wow, this is a great topic. I have seen a lot. It's interesting that Sandy brought up produce in Europe. And I don't know if Sandy, you know this, but we're tracking right now about 60 million plastic trays in North America that move produce. We're using your sensors and RAIN RFID And we were brought in because they were faced with several very critical challenges that were just bleeding money out of their supply chain. The first of which, it's a very complex supply chain in that there are 10,000 growers across North America, and there are thousands of retailers, and these assets are just scattered across all of North America. And when that happens, there's inherently inefficiencies in the handling, and therefore our customer had cycle days that were north of 100 days before they got their assets back. And that's just atrocious. And they had done a calculation that was costing them upwards of $15 million a year in waste by not having a more efficient visibility on those assets. Additionally, when you reduce it down to plastic, now I was talking metal racks earlier, but when you get down to plastics, you introduce another extremely significant issue, and that is just sheer loss. And that loss comes in many forms. We do a lot of work in the baking industry. In fact, I was at a significant baking meeting earlier today where the number one issue was the amount of loss. A typical baking organization will lose 30% of their assets, 25 to 30% of their assets per year. That means they're replacing 25 to 30% of their fleet every year. And that's for no growth. That's through, it's just loss. And that loss is because there's a lot of theft, because plastic can be regrinded. So there's organized crime rings that steal plastic.
The thieves, I've read about this. It's wild.
It is astronomical. It's crazy that, because the supply chain in baking, and we're going to bounce around a little bit, so hopefully I don't take too much time here on this, but the supply chain in baking is set up so that the bread product is dropped at restaurants, at stores, at convenience gas stations, you name it, wherever there's bread products, the plastic sits outside because there's no room in these places to store empty plastic. So it sits out back until the next delivery when they pick it up and they pick it up. Well, between Tuesday and Friday, on Thursday, there's trucks that come by and just steal the stuff and take it to the regrinder and regrind the plastic and collect the money off of it. And it's a chronic issue in the baking world that takes place. These are just two of the issues. And then I'm just going to toss one or two more into the stacks that I won't elaborate on, but damage and trying to determine where the damage or mishandling is taking place. Having sensors, when you've got an asset that is common across many different supply chain partners, being able to figure out where this specific serialized asset traveled on this last trip to see why it was broken and start to trend analyze. When I send it over to this partner over here, this trading partner, I'm 3 times more likely to have it come back broken than all the rest of my supply chain. Why is that? I can start to look at that. Or things like I can set up a sensor on my wash line. Why do I have to clean this one multiple times to get it ready from an FDA standpoint to go back into circulation? But I have all sorts of ROI opportunities here when I put a technology like this in place.
That's awesome. Sandy,
Jody, I have a question for Dave on what you said. Dave, you're talking about baking industry loss rates 25 to 30%, which is astounding. But what percentage of that then impacts the food products that they're carrying? Meaning, what percentage of food is now lost because the returnable maybe was lost as well?
Oof.
I know a cited example. And I think
that
you're leading the horse to water right now. No. He knows what answer he's going to get. I happen to know that there is a organization in an industry we were referring to that's losing $35 million a year in products in the food supply chain, and they just don't know where to find it.
Isn't that unbelievable? Oof. Sandy, I'm assuming these things aren't shocking you either. They may be shocking to some of our audience. I think maybe you think this stuff doesn't really add up, and boy, does it add up.
They're not shocking, or I should say they're not surprising, but every time I hear them, I'm still surprised. Yeah. And it feels like a paradoxical statement, but I'm shaking my head because, solutions like the solutions Dave was talking about that RTI has, the solutions that barcoding has, there are solutions to these challenges and pain points, right, available. And I know we'll get to that part of the conversation, but I still kind of shake my head when I hear some of the stats. So the only one thing I would add to that is I think there's in a pre-RFID world or pre-IoT fully instrumented world of RTIs, there's a pretty heavy reliance on the human factor to keep track of these things, the RTIs and these assets, the RTIs. And those humans, whether it's the person loading, unloading a truck, whether it's the forklift operator, whether it's someone working a conveyor belt line, whether it's someone at a grocery store receiving the RTI, et cetera, they're likely most concerned about the thing inside the RTI,
Right.
but likely not very concerned, because it's not their job, quote unquote, to care about the RTI itself, because it's in many cases probably not owned by the organization that human works for.
Right.
And so there's this big reliance on the human factor in ensuring that these things are tracked and traced and put back in the right spots and stored in the right places, and where it's returned back to the original owner. But that's not necessarily a priority or primary accountability for that person. So you rely so much on that human element, and it's likely one of the first points of failure. And automation, I wouldn't say it fully accounts for that, but it dramatically reduces the dependence on that element of the workflow. And I think it probably is a contributor to some of these numbers that Dave was citing and that JW was talking about.
Hey, Jody, one of the things I want to add to what Sandy just made that ties back to what Dave said as well. We're talking about labor and accountability. And this resonates just because Dave and I were actually at the facility the other day where we saw this. So in some of these scenarios, we want workers are paid based on productivity. And a service center, for example, they're paid on how many RPCs or containers they can push through like a wash line and get shipped back out for that cycle. But they're doing it at such a rate of a speed that we were literally watching these guys throw these things to the ground to the point they almost exploded on impact. But to Dave's point, those are areas then in those service centers, those distribution centers, where you can then start to have metrics on loss or damage based on worker productivity and who's working that line. So you can really get visibility to where the challenges are within your own operations as it relates to things like labor as well.
It's such a great example. And I think, we all of us sometimes collectively, if I've reached leadership roles in our companies, we sometimes lose sight of what's happening right on the floor, right? And that's probably a great example of what seemed like a great idea. It's like, let's make sure we have really high productivity targets, and then people find a way, right? Oh, just chuck these things, and then all of a sudden you're losing money in a whole different way. So wow, it's a really great example. So I think I can already, the wheels are turning in terms of, you talk about like corrugated breaking down and people and complicated stacks and things like that. I can see why potentially kind of a barcode alone is not sufficient in order to track these. Certainly pen and paper, poof, get rid of that right away. But it does seem to me that, a lot of times the barcode is still the most cost efficient way of tracking something, and certainly probably a piece of this solution. But I think in this particular instance, it's not enough. Let's talk about why is that need to go to RAIN RFID so important? And let's just get right into it. How about Sandy? We'll give you get you out of the starting gate first.
Yeah, thanks. So obviously, I have a little bias about RAIN and RFID. What? Surprise, surprise. So we're in a unique position at Impinj where we've been in the RAIN RFID technology space for the entire duration of our existence as a company, 20 plus years. And obviously, the technology has come a long way, but even before getting into all the details of the solutions, the reality is, going back to my point about eliminating or minimizing the manual human required processes or steps in a process, RFID is a great way to start going down that path. It's not the holy grail, one size fits all solution. There are other things related to business process and training that are just as important. It's not always about the technology. It's not only about the technology, but the technology can go a long way in I think, de-risking any business process. And and keeping this part short, because I suspect a lot of your audience is very familiar with this, the unique thing about RAIN RFID technology that makes it a good fit for RTI use cases is the labels or the tags that go onto RTIs are relatively inexpensive relative to the value of the RTI and some of the pain points that have already been talked about. Do not require line of sight, do not require batteries on the labels, can be read, 1,000 items per second, can be read at long distances, can be read by fixed readers, so you don't necessarily need to have an employee with a handheld, waving the wand around to scan them. So there are a lot of technological benefits to the technology that lend themselves really well to addressing some of the problems that we've already talked about. And I think as a result of that, you're seeing success stories, like, again, some of the ones that have already been referenced, of end customers getting value really, really quickly. That wholesale food producer that I mentioned a few minutes ago, they saw ROI within a few months of deploying their fixed RFID reader-based solution with their reusable crates and totes that they use in their business. Of course, everyone's mileage is going to vary, but it's kind of a indication of how quickly done right a solution can kind of pay for itself.
So that's actually a little surprising to me. It might be to the audience too. I think we may not have realized quite how. I mean, obviously every case is different, but that the possibility is there for a relatively fast ROI. Dave, you're kind of my story guy. I'd love to know some stories of what you guys have seen. Obviously, your software is kind of making sense of all this, of all the reads. So what are you seeing out there in terms of why really, I get it, but us humans, we're slow to change sometimes. We need that. We need a couple more examples.
So you've opened up the realm of possibility in this conversation, and I was going to answer your initial question that Sandy started with a single word, and it's just volume. Just volume. And when you get into the RTI world, especially the lower dollar ones, you're typically talking exceptionally high volume, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions, as is the cases, some of the cases we were just talking about. And the sheer practicality of scanning with a line of sight technology, it just becomes impractical, and therefore it isn't done. You then layer in human error, and this is actually to pivot a little bit, but I'll try to stay on point. And you guys know me well enough to know I have a very difficult time doing that, but I'll do my best. People a lot of times will ask me, well, RFID is not perfect. It's flawed. And I typically respond with, yeah, it's not 100% technology. But before we start talking about the accuracy of RFID, let's talk about the accuracy of your human resources right now and how good are they? Because people tend to forget how fallible people are, especially at the dock doors and everywhere else. But going back to volume, having that opportunity to collect that massive amount of data to help me better understand what's happening is so meaningful. But also on the ROI calculations, like Sandy was talking about how fast it happens, most of our customers have a primary ROI objective. Some of them are even far enough along to have a secondary ROI objective. But with RFID, you typically will have a tertiary, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. You guys are frozen. I hope I'm still broadcasting. Can you all hear me?
You're still going good. Keep going.
Okay, good. Thank you. You all froze for a second. I thought I lost you. So what I find is when you put an operations hat on, you get to look for all these secondary and tertiary and fourth and fifth ROI opportunities that no one's ever thought of, because most people can't get past just collecting data to begin with. So when you start having data at your disposal, data is very, very powerful. And when you throw some of the analytical tools at that data, such as a Power BI or there's a comparable, forgetting the other product that's very comparable to Power BI, but and you can slice this data. I can tell a lot of things that I never knew about my supply chain before. Like, for example, damage. If I can trace damage back to, like I said earlier, where it's happening at, I can fix it. And when you have these large volumes of data, what always comes into play as well is the Pareto effect. It's always 80% of the problem is centered in 20% of the supply chain. But where is that 20%? It's hidden, it's buried. But when you have data, you can unravel it. You can find out where there's 20%, and you can go fix the problems. You can be very laser focused and targeted and fixing supply chain problems.
Oh, you know what? So there's a book called The Technology Fallacy. Really great book if you've never read it. It's all about, people being the key to digital transformation and technology in that matter. But one of the things that I love is that you don't really even get a sense of how technology is going to impact your business in the long run until you start using it. And I love this example that you just gave. So I may go into it with this one ROI calculation that I'm going to look to. And as soon as I actually get into it and I start using this brain RFID technology and I get the data, I'm thinking to myself, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. I have all these other wonderful ways that I can start to leverage this in my business to have an impact. One of the things that you talked about earlier, which was the fact that this isn't just within my own operation, a lot of times it's with trading partners. So JW, I wanted to see, like, when you start to adopt this technology, what does that mean for the trading partner? How does that work when we're talking about other organizations being involved?
I think it actually comes back to a point that I was going to make, and it's kind of like a plug for GS1 at the same time, which is, basically, utilizing standards, and standards, comes in and it provides value in different ways. Serialization was one of the things I want to mention earlier, because as Dave was calling out, you have all this data. True, absolutely true, but it starts with serialized data. So, whether it be with RAIN RFID or a 2D barcode, that's where you start to get this serialized data that enables all these, robust reportings and things that Dave's talking about. But then you take that serialized data, from standards bodies like GS1, and you look at, things beyond the data carrier, and look at more into the world of, data sharing. Certainly, data sharing has gone on for years in different ways and with different systems. But as the technology, RAIN RFID, continues to grow and evolve and get adopted across supply chain horizontally, the evolution of standards from like GS1 and such are now enabling trading partners to have better supply chain visibility using some different standards from GS1, such as EPCIS, which is one of the newer standards. It's new in the sense it's been around for a few years. It's newer in the sense of its adoption. So we're seeing that as these bigger, broader supply chains leverage technologies like RAIN RFID and get exposure to that serialized data for all these operational benefits that then affect their upstream and downstream trading partners. A lot of that can be facilitated too through data sharing standards.
So we need to speak the same language. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
I love it. So let's just, I'd love to, and it's not to beat a dead horse, but I just want to really make sure people kind of get the full scope of some of these benefits, because I frankly have a list in front of me, but I'd love to just pick through a couple more. Inventory accuracy, I'm assuming, an accountability we just talked about with the trading partners, but talk to me about the inventory piece of this, of knowing what I have, where I have it. How does that change with RAIN RFID? Dave, we'll start with you.
So inventorying, first of all, JW and I have actually gone to places recently where we've seen organizations that might do a four-wall cycle count once a year, or they'll only do segments of their warehouse each quarter, because of the sheer difficulty of achieving that. Now, if everything in my facility was RF enabled, I literally could do daily if I wanted to. I could use a robot to move around and do my inventories just by scanning and sensing what's on the shelves. Seek and finding things becomes infinitely easier because things get mislocated. Things get put on the wrong racks, shelves, containers in the facilities. It happens all the time. And it becomes an Easter egg hunt where we're using RAIN RFID in a warehouse down in Georgia, where they will spend hours looking for a partially completed job of the material that they make, and eventually give up and go recreate it, and never finding that inventory. And it sits there, and it's once a year they come across it and they can clean it up. With Rain RFID, I have the ability to just grab a handheld, select what I'm looking for, and almost use the RFID handheld as a Geiger counter to find what I'm looking for. So I can count, I can find. There's so much enablement that I can do by having access to Rain RFID in a warehouse.
And I'm assuming too, with the containers or the racks and whatnot, this is just has huge implications. I don't have to I don't have to stop what I'm doing, right? Which is
you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And I forgot we were really focused on the returnables, but yeah, just in general, everything becomes so much easier.
One of the points, Dave, if I could just chime in, Jody, one of the points Dave mentioned resonated with me about searching for your things. In this case, it could be RTIs, and organizations are sometimes shocked about how little visibility they actually have compared to the visibility they thought they had into the things that matter to their business, their assets, the RTIs in this case. And the part that reminded me when Dave was kind of going through his example is customers don't have to start by doing everything on day one to get value from tracking RTIs. We've been talking about, I would say, varying levels of sophisticated use cases in the half hour or so that we've been talking so far. But the handheld-based use case, an example that Dave just mentioned, that's an example that does not necessarily require a lot of upfront infrastructure to be built out by the organization, and likely still will deliver very high ROI, very high value, and sufficient value to kind of justify the next use case and the use case after that and the use case after that. And that's often the way we see the journey going with many customers once they start using Rain, and then it snowballs after that, because they'll come up with examples or use cases for how to apply the data coming out of these use cases in novel and innovative ways, using software like RTIs to solve problems they may not have originally even been thinking about as in scope for their project. So I think it's a really great way for customers and organizations to think about getting started and not be intimidated by, oh, I got to do all of this to get even a little bit of value.
I love that. And I think that makes me think I would love, and maybe JW can kind of walk through this. I'd love a couple examples, maybe one at the simple level and one at the more, advanced level. What, like if all this sounds great, right? But what really happens in my facility? What do I really have to do to adopt this? What are the actual components of a solution if I want to start tracking returnable transport items with Rain RFID? So JW, I'll start with you, but just break it down to me real basic.
Yeah, I would say if you were to keep it in its simplest form, the first one is that digital marker. That digital marker is what ultimately creates that digital ID. That digital twin is the industry buzzwords like to call it. And that digital marker can be a combination of RFID and barcode, which is either embedded in the container or attached to it, or some way of being a part to track it. From there, obviously, you have the physical layer, the hardware layer, the infrastructure. Clearly, Dave's background clearly well positions those examples of those dock door portals that we see most commonly used for inbound, outbound dock door operations, as well as then other infrastructure that can be applied to conveyor tunnels and pallet wrappers and such. And then last and not least, obviously, is then that software layer, which is certainly the value that ultimately Dave and Real-Time Intelligence bring with their platform. So you take the labels, the infrastructure empowered by Impinj, and then software powered by RT Intel, and then people like barcoding kind of bring it all together to make it operate for customers.
It's just the synergies. I love it. And that's the thing. I think, Sandy, to your point, while there are, certain steps and there's certain things that you have to consider and invest in, it's not to say you have to be willing to invest in these things, right? We have to actually know what the RTI is, meaning we have to tag it, we have to identify it, right? And then we have to have some ability to capture that data and then understand that data, right, from a software layer and take action on it. Because it's not enough just to identify, right? We have to take those following steps. How we capture, right, could take many forms. It could be something that is a lower investment in terms of a handheld type of reader, or a more advanced investment in terms of fixed infrastructure. But the case remains. We identify, we capture, and then we have to have that software layer. And that's why, the partnership with these companies, all of us together, is so powerful, because it's not only do we huddle together, we solution together. Right? So Dave, I know we talked a little bit, we talked about your automotive example. We talked a little bit about the bakery example. Are there any other kind of industry related examples that you want to give us that would just help bring this RTI conversation a little bit more down to earth? And I'm going to give you the sign.
Thank you. I was hoping I wouldn't do that, but I needed to filter out some background noise. So I'm going to tie together your last conversation with your current ask, because I think it's relevant here. Here's a use case. We have a customer who sends their RTIs to a third party for repair purposes. They want to have visibility to the work being done at a repair facility. But that repair facility is a repair facility for lots of companies, not just our customer. And they don't want to put a device on their network. See, all these devices behind me are physically connected to a network. We actually have deployed a version of this that does not connect to the local area network, but rather has a cellular modem attached to it. So we can set up a sensor read point at a third party's facility without ever infringing upon their network. So I can capture information as it's moving through their facility and backhaul the information to marry it up with my customer's data and with all the rest of these sensors they have in their domain. So I have complete end-to-end visibility. So that's one piece of something that is real world that I think has value for people to realize it. When you need to get data, there are alternative ways than it might necessarily be obvious. The other thing, as it relates to returnables, we treat them in our domain almost like a library book. If you walk into the library card, and you check the book out, you're the possessor of record right now. There's not a sensor on that book. There's or at your house or anywhere else you take that book, but the library knows you have it. That's how we treat a returnable at these dock doors. When a returnable leaves my customer, it goes through a sensor, and we associate the RTI with who now is the possessor of record. And we watch and we wait for it to come back through those doors, and we relieve them of that responsibility. We capture all the metrics about their usage of it. How long did they have it? Did it come back broken? All the other stuff about it. So we can paint a picture. And with enough pictures all stitched together, and in our case, we have 14 billion transactions now in our platform, and about 98% of those are RTI. And once you start to build those pictures, you have the ability to say with confidence, when you send something here, this is probably going to happen. Why? Well, because I sent 987,000 of them there, and this is what tends to happen. So I start to build profiles and understand the complexity of my supply chain broken down into little bits and pieces.
I love that.
One of the things that Dave said that I brought a thought was, so he mentioned third-party locations, right? Which means those third-party locations are in an RPC scenario are also managing other customers' RPCs. When you move to serialized data, when you move to the adoption of standards from like GS1 and using those standards to identify those containers specifically, you'll very clearly start to get a sense of what is your assets versus someone else's assets. So and that, whether that's a third party site or your own, you start to get visibility to what's yours versus what someone else's, and things that you wouldn't have had before without these types of technologies.
Sandy, any commentary? I'll let you weigh in.
I actually had a question for Dave as he was talking, which is I'm curious about in the examples you just described, Dave. What are some of the hurdles you've had to overcome just in educating those customers that you're using as examples of customers who've eventually adopted the technology? But as you think back to the early days of your conversations with those clients, What are some of the hurdles or objections that you may have heard from them that you obviously were very successful in overcoming, and how did you address them?
As I mentioned earlier, the one everyone likes to go to first is, well, I'm not gonna, it's not going to get everything. And we've been able to successfully, actually with the help of the barcoding team as well, over the years, been able to get to a 99.95 accuracy rate based on circumstances. And it's an art. It is truly an art. You don't just set these things up and expect them to just magically work. There's an art, there's a science, it's all that together. And it's not cookie cutter. Even within the same facility, you have settings that you have to test. And we do a lot of testing before we deploy this thing, these solutions, in order to determine, here's how we're going to get to 99.95%. And then I always go back to, and please, Mr. Customer, which one of your processes is 99.95%? Because I'm pretty certain you don't have any. And I'm going to exceed what you're going to. So that's one barrier. The second barrier, as I mentioned earlier, is when you look at a facility like this one here behind me, which I'm going to guess there's 25 doors right up, give or take. There's a significant capital investment here, which layers into that ROI. And a lot of times, the single primary objective for ROI sometimes is stressed or challenged with actually achieving the barrier to get up and over to actually invest. However, this is why if you get the right group of people together who have seen enough over the years to say, don't stop there. There's a secondary, tertiary, or there's a fourth. Let's truly measure, and let's actually look up the rocks and see where are the other ROI opportunities. And you also have to know how to actually monetize those. Here's something that we just talked about earlier today. It's one thing to have visibility for RTIs. And if you don't take action, if all you do is take the data and you don't do anything with it, you're not going to get your ROI.
Right.
Okay. Let's go back to the loss example where I gave you in baking where they lose 25%. Well, I can put all the sensors in the world up and I can tell you where the loss is happening. But if you don't take action, you're still going to have 25% loss. So a lot of times we talk with our customers and emphasize, we're going to give you actionable data, actionable insights. Here's where your problems are. And we actually have to sometimes lead the horse to the customers and show them what to do next. So we do quarterly business reviews with the customers in order to help them figure out, well, how do I actually get my ROI? And so it's a constant, nonstop evolution working with customers to make sure that they're always looking for how to recover, get the ROI.
It's got to be rewarding for those customers, though. I completely hear you about the great point about taking action on the data that the systems are providing the customer. But it's all I have to imagine it's gratifying for the customers to know that they have a way of measuring whether they're improving or not. So yes, they a lot of times you take action on problems as a business person. You take actions on problems you identify. You don't always have great ways of measuring objectively, are the actions resulting in the improvements that you hope to see, want to see, wish to see, but the systems that you're describing enable that measurement, enable the monitoring, enable the tracking of progress in a very, very objective way, which has got to be rewarding for the customers once they're down that path.
So Sandy, you're spot on. So I opened up when Jody asked for what are some of the problems that the industry faces now pre-RAIN RFID adoption, and I shared with you that my one client had an over 100-day average cycle time with their assets. So I was waiting to give you the punchline. They're now down to $14 million a year in the supply chain. Okay. Something you just said reminded me of an anecdote. Yes.
Can you say that one more time? I feel like we got to the punchline and then you kind of disappeared and we didn't.
I was on the edge of my seat.
So
give us the punchline again.
The punchline is my client started with over 100 days average cycle time in their supply chain. They're now down to 74, which resulted in a $14 million per year savings in their supply chain cost.
Awesome.
And it's just simple math. They went from 3.5 turns per asset per year to 5 full turns per asset per year, which is just incredible return. And Sandy just said something a few moments ago, an anecdote I like to always point back to. You can't fix what you don't measure. And RAIN RFID gives you an incredible visibility to measure the metrics that matter most.
Oof, that's like a marketing tagline right there. I like it. It's warmed my heart. Warming my marketing heart. Well, I absolutely, I feel really, really excited because this is the right group. So barcoding, one of the things that we always bring to the table is we like to start with process and people, and then we start about that layer, that technology layer in there. And I think, Dave, that speaks to really what you're talking about there, where it's the technology is part of, and Sandy, you were very upfront with this right away, right? The technology is part of a bigger whole. You've got to also look at your processes. You've got to look at how people are involved in order to go from that 100 to that 74, right? You don't do that the technology is a huge boost to that, of course, but you need these other things. You need these other factors to be at play. And that's why I think this particular group of partners who have come together to really help you, that's why it's so powerful. Barcoding does, bring these pieces and parts together. We walk you through that PPT part of the process. We bring these folks on the line with us, with Dave and Sandy. We talk about how this solution is going to impact your business. We're able to stay with you for the long term, continuously improve, right? We're not going to be satisfied with that first level of ROI. We want to get to those deeper levels. And, with real-time intelligence and Impinj on the team, you have a full solution. And barcoding, obviously, the key component to that as well. So that's why we got us all together. I want to just really encourage you, if this has been on your mind, if you've been thinking about this in terms of your RTI management, now is the time. Don't go into next year with this still hanging over your head. This is a viable solution and can really change the game for you. So contact us on barcoding.com and we'll get you involved with all of the people you heard today and get you going. So I always like to end the huddles with a couple last key questions. The first one won't be the fun one. The first one is more of, for our audience sake, we've talked about a lot of things. So I always like to have one summarized key takeaway. So if people remember nothing else of what we talked about, they remember these couple little points from you guys. So JW, I'm going to start with you, but in terms of wrapping up this idea around tracking RTIs in our business with RAIN RFID, what's one key takeaway that you want the audience to remember?
It's not a matter of how it will work. It's not a matter of will it work. It's a matter of how you will make it work. So the technology is matured, it's proven, it's been adopted globally for a variety of initiatives well beyond returnables. And it's, working with partners like barcoding and Impinj and RT Intel to determine how that maps to your processes to make it successful. So the technology works is really the simplest way of putting it.
It works. All right. I like it. Dave, key takeaway.
Oh boy, there's so many. I think I'm just going to go back to the anecdote I just shared, which is if you don't measure it, you can't fix it. And there's so many things that are broken. You have to start with measurement. And this is just a phenomenal way to measure it.
I love it. I mean, go back to your mic drop moment. I mean, why not? We got to reiterate that. It was really good. Sandy, with Impinj, I'm going to give you the final piece here.
Yeah. So coming from Impinj, I have to go with the technology takeaway here, and in the technology takeaway category, I would say think about, yes, the tags and the labels that need to get attached to the RTIs, as well as the read points that go along with it. And as a technology provider in the space, we're very unique in that we do both those things. So in working with RTI, working with real-time intelligence, working with barcoding, we're able to bring expertise in both those areas. We found that can be a big success factor on the technology piece of the overall solution.
Love it. Let's consolidate the number of people we got to work with. That's for sure. So awesome. I really appreciate Impinj and real-time intelligence joining us for this huddle today. It's been a wonderful conversation. We could obviously talk for many more hours, but I think we'd lose our YouTube audience at that point. So we will probably call it a day. But I wanted to end with one final little question, because we were talking about returnables. Have you ever borrowed something that you absolutely did not give back? So I will start with Dave. Have you ever borrowed something that you just pocketed and never gave back?
I'm sure I'd have to say yes, I did, but I don't know what it is. I will tell you, I tell you, I have not used an RTI like some people used in the milk crates in their dorm rooms back in the day, and I never utilized any of those. But I'm sure there's got to be a pen somewhere in my collection that I borrowed and never came back.
I like it. I like it. How about you, JW?
My wife is here. She would make sure to tell me it's her iPhone charger.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Let's put an RFID tag on that sucker. How about you, Sandy?
I definitely have milk crates in my basement that I use for storage, and I'm not going to tell you where I got them, but I did not pay for them. Let's leave it at that.
Oh, we're spilling all the secrets on the huddle. I'm a notorious book thief. So if I borrow a book from you, it's very unlikely that you are ever getting it back. And again, from all of us at Barcoding Inc., thank you for joining the huddle today. Thank you, Impinj. Thank you, Real-Time Intelligence. You guys are incredible partners. We absolutely love working with you. We love putting these solutions together. So please reach out to us. We want to help you. So barcoding.com, fill out that schedule a consultation, and we will get started with Impinj, Real-Time Intelligence. Barcoding will help steer the ship, and off we go to better days ahead. So don't delay. Barcoding.com. Yes, our name is Barcoding, but we love RFID too. So schedule a consultation. We'll get everything rolling for you, and we'll help determine if this can be a really viable option in your business. If you like this video, you like what you saw, you want to watch more conversations like these, hit subscribe. We've got new content coming out all the time. So once again, thank you from the bottom of my RFID filled heart, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care.